Hello everyone, welcome back to Powerful Nothing and Magic the Gathering Q podcast. I'm your host Dan, and as always I'm joined by James. James, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. So I think when this episode goes live, we'll have just watched England progressing to the World Cup semi-finals, is my prediction. We'll have taken Brazil apart, I'm going to say, having dispatched Mexico in the previous round. And,
easy, yes.
Yeah, it's all going to be fine. That's my call.
Everything will be fine.
I'm sure those comments will age wonderfully.
Yeah, 100% James. It's definitely coming home. I'm saying that with full confidence at time of recording. We have a great episode for everyone today. Today, we're going to be doing part 2 of an episode we did, I think maybe about half a year ago. We're going to be looking at some of our favourite build-arounds. Before we get into that main topic, just as a reminder, down in the show notes below, there will be a link to a card gallery if you want to see some of the pretty cards that we're going to be talking about, as well as things like timecodes and a link to a YouTube version of the podcast where you can watch the pretty cards appear on screen as well. While you're down there, please consider giving the podcast a 5-star review. Thumbs up greatly helps us out. Let's move on to our main topic, though. This is part 2 of our favourite build-arounds. Before we get into the actual section talking about some awesome cards and what you can do with them, let's just remind everyone, what is a build-around? A build-around is a card that is weak in the average deck, but can be strong if it's well supported. It requires you to change your picks and draft differently to accommodate it, but generally it's going to be like a cornerstone card of a deck. So some great examples of build-arounds are some cards that we touched on in our first part of the series. So previously we touched on cards like Birthing Pod, Opposition, Oath of Druids, and Lurus. These are cards that you take them and they really reward you for getting other cards that synergize really well with them.
Yeah, for sure. And I think a build-around is slightly different from just being a synergy-based card, right? Because if you think about a card like Mox Opal, for example, it's definitely a card that needs a specific setup to work, right? You need to have lots of artifacts in play. I wouldn't really put it in the build-around category, though, right? Because you just have to be in the artifacts deck, and any good version of an artifact deck Mox Opal will be great. It doesn't actually ask you to make specifically different picks to make Mox Opal work. Like you'd make similar picks if you had the artifact deck without Mox Opal. Whereas a card like Oath of Druids, for example, your deck is going to look very, very different because of that one card, right? It puts different restrictions on you. You have to not play little creatures. You want to have a bunch of giant stuff to oath into. So for me, that the key thing about build rounds is just making you draft very, very differently. And they can add a huge amount of replayability to cubes, I think. Because it's not a whole archetype, right? It's just one card that we're supporting. So often for not very many additional card slots, you can sort of almost introduce whole new decks into the cube, right? And even if a bunch of the time no one takes them, they go last pick, fine, because it's kind of worth it for that one time where someone does take it and build around it, and it sort of generates a whole new archetype that didn't exist before in the cube.
Yeah, exactly. It's one of the best things about these types of cards is that it's by adding one card, you get so many more possibilities, and it just makes the cube way more replayable, and that's something that's really awesome. I think with that, let's actually talk about our first build around. It's a card that I don't think I've played with enough, partly because it kind of scares me a little bit, James, but I'm glad you're going to fill me in on it today. First up, we have Agatha's Soul Cauldron. So let me read this one out first. This is 2 generic mana for a legendary artifact. You may spend mana as though it were mana of any color to activate abilities of creatures you control. Creatures you control with +1/+1 counters on them have all activated abilities of all creature cards exiled with Agatha's Soul Cauldron, and you can tap it to exile target card from a graveyard. When a creature card is exiled this way, put a +1 counter on target creature you control. So James, I can see how kind of this is just like the fair version of this seems like a pretty cool like value engine. You eat some stuff in your graveyard when it dies, you put some counters on it, make it bigger, you maybe turn a creature into a Llanowar Elves. I'm assuming we can do some cooler stuff with this, kind of like, talk to us about this card, James.
Yeah, for sure. This card can play in a lot of very different ways, and some of them are actually really powerful. So the default thing that this does, right, is it's a fairly mediocre bit of graveyard hate. In the drafts where no one does the Soul Cauldron thing, that is what Soul Cauldron will do. It will sit in someone's sideboard, they'll board it in against Reanimator. Fine. But it can actually be a really, really powerful engine piece as well as that. So the key, of course, is to get some creatures with really powerful activated abilities, get them into the graveyard, activate your Soul Cauldron, put a counter on a creature in play. That's going to get that ability without you having to cast the creature, and that's going to scale really well because each turn we keep activating the Soul Cauldron, and because it's all creatures get the abilities of everything exiled under it, so we can end up with multiple creatures in play, all of which have really powerful activated abilities. So, like, one approach you could go with this, right, is just look for the absolute most powerful activated abilities in the cube and not worry about casting the cards. Just try and get it into the graveyard, exile it under the Soul Cauldron, and go from there. That definitely can work. Like Gristlebrand, for example, very powerful activated ability. You exile your Gristlebrand under a Soul Cauldron, and all of a sudden your little 1-mana creature in play has the ability to pay 7 life and draw 7 cards. That is really powerful. And kind of
dangerous, though.
Dangerous. You're lacking the 7/7 lifelink part of the puzzle.
Yeah, that does seem key.
You only need to draw 7 cards once, really, right? In most games. But also at that point, we're kind of just a Reanimator deck with more steps there, really, right? Which is fine. It's certainly a thing we can do, but it's I think the real strength of Soul Cauldron compared to, like, say, playing a reanimation spell is that it scales across multiple creatures. So even if it's not a ability that's as game-breaking as draw 7 cards, once it's stacked up on multiple creatures, it can be really, really powerful. And we don't necessarily have to go to the trouble of, like, playing creatures we can't cast just to put them under a Soul Cauldron. We can just play good threats with really powerful abilities. And then if they die off, we mill them over, they go to a graveyard naturally, then we're going to put them under our Cauldron, we're going to get them on multiple creatures that are in play, and that it's going to be a really powerful, like, long-term value engine. So a few of the, like, really premium ones. Grist the Hungertide. This is the 1 green-black Planeswalker for Modern Horizons. But crucially, it says when Grist is not on the battlefield, it is a creature. Which means we can exile it under our Soul Cauldron and get the abilities. So essentially, all of your creatures with a +1/+1 counter on them become Planeswalkers at this point, in the sense that they have the loyalty abilities of the Grist. So you can, each of your creatures, you can put a loyalty counter on them to create a 1/1 token and mill a card. Or if you get to 2 loyalty counters on them, you can remove 2 loyalty counters to use a -2 ability on Grist, which is you may sack a creature if you do destroy target creature or Planeswalker. It's pretty unlikely to get to your 5, but this is just, like, fuels itself really, really well, because each time you use the plus, right, you're creating more bodies, which are then going to pick up more counters, plus you're milling stuff over, so you're milling some more stuff to exile into your Soul Cauldron. It's going to represent a ton of long-term value. Turning all your board of creatures into Planeswalkers is really powerful. And they're Planeswalkers that can't be attacked, right? Because they're just creatures in play, they just happen to have these loyalty abilities.
Nice, yeah, that seems like a really nuts little combination. They kind of, maybe they did think of that when they designed it, but yeah, Grist is a cool card, and that's really awesome. What other good examples are there, James? Like, are you looking, like, are you really trying to lean into, like, the activated ability side of things with this? Like what are some other good activated abilities on creatures that we might want to give the rest of our board?
Yeah, for sure. So a really powerful one we've got fairly recently is Loot the Pathfinder. This is a card I've just been really impressed with in Powered Cube in general, actually. But I think it's maybe the best thing to put under a Soul Cauldron at this point. So this is the 2 and a Teamer, so 2 green, blue, red, 5 mana total for a legendary creature, Beast Noble. It has double strike, vigilance, and haste. and it has 3 exhaust abilities. So remember, exhaust you can only use once. So you can pay a green and tap it to add 3 mana of any one color. You can pay a blue and tap it to draw 3 cards, or you can pay a red and tap it to deal 3 to any target. So you get this under a Soul Cauldron, it goes ham pretty quickly. All of a sudden, your creatures can all tap to draw 3 cards for just a green mana, or Lightning Bolt something. And on the regular loot, I find you don't use that mana ability that often. But when all your creatures have these abilities, that mana ability is actually quite good, because you're going to be drawing so many cards, and you have so much to spend your mana on, because your creatures all have these insane activated abilities, that you end up actually wanting that mana generation off some of them. And again, this is not like some bad card we're asking you to put in your deck to make Soul Cauldron work. The same with Grist, right? It's a powerful creature which you'd want to play anyway. But it just goes absolutely nuts once you get this onto a Soul Cauldron. Like, every creature with a counter on it just becomes a must-deal-with threat for your opponent.
Yeah, that seems very scary. Yeah, we do love Ancestral Recall, and getting a bunch of it seems awesome. What else do you like, James?
Yeah, so another one which is really powerful and will be familiar to anyone who played Standard of sort of circa 6 months ago is Vivi from the Final Fantasy set. So Vivi Ornitier is 1, a blue and a red for a 0/3 legendary creature wizard, and it has the activated ability 0. You may add X mana in any combination of blue or red, where X is this creature's power. Activate only once and only during your turn. Or activate only during your turn, only once each turn.
I think this would still be being played in Standard if it wasn't emergency banned.
Yes, I'd certainly imagine it would be.
Very fair Magic card, though.
Yeah. VV also has an ability of when you cast non-creature spells, you put counters on it and deals damage to a target. So obviously when it's under the Cauldron, we don't get that triggered ability, but we crucially, when we're adding mana, VV starts at 0 power, so you need to get counters on it for it to add mana. The creatures we're putting our counters on, well, they have at least 1 power because we put a +1/+1 counter on it. But if we just put a counter on a 4/4 and made it into a 5/5, then instantly that is going to be adding 5 mana for us right away. Because it's this creature's power, right? It's the power of the creature we put the counter on. So this can be a ridiculous amount of mana generation if you get this under a Cauldron. It's not sort of as complete a engine, I guess, as something like Loot, because it doesn't give you something to do with the mana, right? It is just tons and tons of mana. But again, bear in mind, it's a lot of mana. Yeah. And bear in mind, you can end up with other stuff exiled under the Cauldron as well, right? So imagine you had a VV and a Loot, and it's kind of over, right? So you can use the VV ability and the Loot ability. You can draw a million cards, Lightning Bolt, everything, and they're going to be dead very quickly.
Yeah, there seems some... I know there's some more examples you want to touch on, but kind of with this, are you specifically trying to find a combination? Because I'm assuming there must be a world where you can build your own Splinter Twin Kiki Chiki combo. Is that kind of how you're going with it, or is it more just we're just trying to value out something good?
I find that generally, once you get going, if you have a couple of creatures with counters on them, any one of these is going to be most of the time good enough. Any 2 of these, you're probably winning. It doesn't matter. Say you had a Grist and a Loot, for example, under it. Those don't particularly synergize, but it doesn't matter. You're just creating so much value every turn. But it's gonna run away from your opponent really quickly. You certainly could do combo stuff with this. There are instant wins combos, I'm sure, available, but I find you're just generating so much value that you actually don't need the combo. You're just drawing so many cards, making so much power and toughness that that tends to close it up for you on its own without needing a combo.
No, yeah, that makes sense. That seems very cool. There's 2 more you wanted to touch on, James. Talk to us about Urza, Lord High Artificer. How does that go in a in an Agatha Soul Cauldron deck?
Yeah, so as people probably know, the 4 mana 1/4 makes a construct and has tap an artifact to make a blue, and 5 mana to shuffle your library, exile the top card, and you can play it this turn without paying its mana cost. So this is pretty powerful under a Soul Cauldron in the right deck. It sort of goes in a different deck than the other ones we've talked about, right? Because it's this is going to go in an artifact deck. We're going to be making hopefully a bunch of tokens with, say, our Third Path Iconoclast, our Ravenous Robots, those sort of cards. We should have bodies to put the counters on. And if our Urza ends up in our graveyard, we can pop it under the Soul Cauldron, and we therefore still have access to that super powerful Urza ability, which is, in a good artifact deck, is going to run away with the game. And the other nice thing about this is the Soul Cauldron is also a cheap artifact, which is already something our Urza deck wants. So there's a certain amount of synergy there. And there are some other good artifacts you can put under this as well, like Walking Ballista goes really nicely under the Cauldron.
That seems like a way of going infinite, if I'm honest with you.
Yes, yeah.
That's quite cool, but yes.
Yeah, you can do some powerful stuff with that. But yeah, it's just highlight that the Soul Cauldron decks can look quite different from each other. I think the sort of default is a green-based thing, but you can make Cauldron work in an artifact deck as well, and it can be very nice.
That's pretty cool. Yeah. I'm assuming specifically if you do have some cool combo stuff, you're more likely to have artifact tutors in your artifact deck, so that could be quite nice. You have one more on the list here, James. Talk to us about Yawgmoth Thran Physician.
Yeah, for sure. So this is, again, another Modern Horizons card. This is 2 black for a 2/4 legendary creature human cleric. It has protection from humans, which no one ever remembers until it's very, very relevant.
Very relevant. Very relevant, yes.
You can pay 1 life. It also has crucially, the activated ability, pay 1 life, sack another creature to put a -1/-1 counter on up to 1 target creature and draw a card. And you can pay black and discard a card to proliferate. So this is really nice in that those abilities are really powerful, and it is quite a natural fit in some decks that want Soul Cauldron already. It's not as sort of straight up broken as having all those loot abilities, for example, but it is going to grind out your opponent over time. A really nice combination, actually, is if you can get this and the Grist under the Cauldron, because the Grist means all your creatures with counters on make more creatures, and you can then sacrifice those creatures to the Yawgmoth to draw cards and kill your opponent's creatures, at which point the amount of value you're just generating turn on turn is going to run away with the game really, really quickly.
No, nice. Yeah, this does seem like a really cool build on that. I think I need to kind of get into more decks. If you are trying to play it, though, and trying to support it, kind of like, what other cards are you trying to put around it to support it? Like, are you wanting other ways of putting counters on things, for example? Because I could see a world where if you have a bit of +1/+1 counter synergy as well, it just means you don't have to do the work of putting counters on things. They just come in naturally with them. But like, it is. Is that good, or like, is there anything else you would recommend for getting the most out of the Soul Cauldron?
Yeah, for sure. So I think you can go in a few different shells. The sort of default one I found quite good is a green-based self-mill deck. So you're flipping over your cards into your graveyard naturally. And you're finding these really important targets to exile with it. And crucially, that those decks tend to put a lot of sort of fairly low-value bodies into play, right? Think the Stater Wayfinders, the Stitcher Suppliers, the Town Greeters. These cards are all really good here. Because they're gonna dig you to your loot or your grist or whatever you're trying to exile, whilst at the same time providing a body to put the +1/+1 counter onto. And on top of that, they're generating value for you, right? They're digging you to lands. And these are... the reason I like it in this sort of deck is it's as the sort of deck which always has creatures in play even when it's not winning. Like, you don't want... It's not actually providing you much value if all your creatures are, 3 and 4 mana cards which can kill the opponent on their own. Because then why did you need the Soul Cauldron if you have a creature in play? Whereas this sort of deck is just putting out a lot of very expendable little bodies that you can then buff up and make into really meaningful game objects with the Soul Cauldron. And then, but yeah, they can also say going the Artifact Shell can be quite good. Or you can do this as a bit more of a combo-y thing and be like, I'm very actively trying to find this one combination of cards and put it onto my Soul Cauldron. But that I find tends to be a little bit harder to put together because it is the thing like where you only have one Soul Cauldron. So you want to still have a functional game plan when you don't draw it. And those green self-mill decks, they want lots of these cards anyway, right? They want Grist, they want Loot anyway, they want Yawgmoth anyway. So you can have a really nice green self-mill value deck, and then this Soul Cauldron can just be like that little engine piece which takes it over the top.
And then I see in the notes here, James, that it overlaps quite nicely with another build round that we like a lot on this channel. That's the Insidious Roots deck. How is that going together? Like, Insidious Roots does make us a bunch of creatures with counters that also make mana. Is that kind of where we're going with this?
Yeah, exactly. So the Insidious Roots is the green and black enchantment. Whenever a creature card leaves our graveyard, you create a 0/1 plant and put a +1/+1 counter on each plant you control. So this sort of works both ways with the Insidious Roots. Firstly, it triggers the Insidious Roots when you activate your Soul Cauldron on your own graveyard.
That's cool.
So you're pumping out creatures, and then those creatures is naturally putting counters onto. So you don't have to activate your Soul Cauldron on each creature. They just all get the ability once you put counters on them. Or to put counters on them. It pops off really quickly. Obviously this is... a bit Magical Christmas Land if we actually have both of them in play, but it certainly comes up, and they naturally want a lot of the same things, right? They naturally want to be milling over creatures into our graveyard. So that is quite a nice little overlap there.
No, awesome. And then finally, I guess, James, with any of these build runs, we do kind of need to keep in mind the power level of cubes that they're going to go into, because some aren't for every cube. What power level of cube do you think would get the most out of a Agatha Soul Cauldron in terms of where it could go?
I think it's pretty broad, actually. I've liked it in Powered Cube. It's not like something you're doing all the time, but because it's kind of already okay as a bit of graveyard hate, it's kind of okay to just chuck it in the cube, and then it does occasionally, the stars need to align a little bit in Powered Cube, I think. It's not something you should be taking early and looking to build around, but when you're in a Teemo deck and you've got some self-mill and you've got a Loot and then you've got a Grist you could splash and you've got a bunch of creatures, then it's you get that Soul Cauldron back and you're like, oh, this draft I can actually do the thing. And when you do the thing, it's really powerful, and it's quite a unique angle, I think, for those cubes. And yeah, when the other 19 out of 20 drafts where that doesn't happen, it ends up in someone's sideboard and it's relevant against Reanimator, and that's fine too. So I like it there. And then obviously if you go slightly lower, more towards the mid-power level cube is probably when it's going to be at its best, and you can look to take it a bit earlier and build around it a bit more because you just have a little bit more time to set up in those cubes. And you can probably afford to play a little bit more of the self-mill setup stuff. Most Powered Cubes can't... I mean, I like Sata Wayfindery stuff, but you can't be playing loads of that stuff, right?
Yeah, you can. It's fine. I love a Sata Wayfinder.
Yeah, for sure. I wouldn't go into the more budgety cubes, just because I don't really think they activate there enough really powerful activated abilities a lot of the time in those cubes to sort of make this worth the effort, I guess.
No, awesome. Yeah, really cool card. I think, yeah. I've got it in my Treat Yourself cube. It seems very treat-worthy there. But yeah, I think I think it may need to come out into my more powerful cube as well. All right, let's keep it going. We have a card next that I know we're both big fans of, but good to actually kind of break it down a bit and talk about how you can get the most out of it. And that card is Dream Halls. This is 3 blue for an enchantment that says, rather than pay the mana cost for a spell, its controller may discard a card that shares a color with that spell. I love Dream Halls. It's some of the most fun I think you can have in Cube is when this deck comes together. You're doing all the big, powerful things. You're cheating on mana. You're just doing some incredibly broken things. You're drawing cards, playing big, multicolored spells. This is one of my favorite build-arounds, I think, in all of Magic. James, what are we doing with the Dream Halls deck? What is the plan? What is the deck wanting to do? What do we need to make it work?
Yeah, this card's so much fun. So Dream Halls, generally the game plan is we get our Dream Halls into play, and then we're going to pitch a card right away to cast something that draws us a lot more cards. So the sort of default here is going to be some sort of Wheel of Fortune Time Twister type effect that draws us back up to 7. But it can also be like maybe a Dig Through Time, but we want like a big card draw spell, right, to immediately stock us back up. And then once we've got that, we've hopefully built our deck in such a way where we can kind of keep going. And we have these really big haymakers because we're not constrained by mana anymore. We're just constrained by number of cards. So you can then look to cast some like really big spells that don't that we can't otherwise think about putting on stuff. This is where your cool ultimatums come in, your Just Guy Revelations. And it's and the other nice thing about Dream Halls is most of these more recently printed similar sounding things will say things like to cast a spell from your hand. Dream Halls doesn't say that. So you can, if you go off with something like an Underworld Breach, you can use the Dream Halls to cast your spells from your graveyard. It also doesn't say exile cards like things like Force of Will or whatever do with discarding cards. So we're fueling our graveyard at the same time. So you can play into that graveyard stuff a little bit as well. And eventually we get to a point where we kind of just have so much velocity that we're gonna see our whole deck, and then it's just figuring out how we win. That might be casting a Cruel Ultimatum a bunch of times. It might be something like a Nexus of Fates for inevitability. Can be quite strong. That's the Time Walk that shuffles back into your library when it resolves. I say Time Walk like it isn't 7 mana. It's a 7 mana Time Walk. But that doesn't matter. We have Dream Halls.
Still very doable.
Yeah. And you eventually get to a point where it's like, oh yeah, my library has like 5 cards in it. One of them is a Nexus of Fate. I'm going to see them all every turn. I'm going to cast Nexus of Fate every turn. Or it can even be like a Brain Freeze is a perfectly reasonable way to go about winning the game, or a Tendrils of Agony. But really the challenge is getting the Dream Halls in play and like getting that first draw 7 off and keeping that velocity going through your deck so you're always seeing enough cards. Because remember, you are going down a card each time you cast it. We don't want to be like casting Ponders off this. We don't want to be casting Lightning Bolts off this. We want to be casting big, expensive, impactful stuff.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, the card draw, especially, I think is like the it's what makes the deck most powerful, but also the most fun. Kind of, it's one thing I really like about Dream Halls is that you get into play and it's not a guarantee that you're going to win. You're going to have to do some things, but by God, are you going to do some things? What challenges do you think come up with Dream Halls, James? Because obviously it is symmetrical. That is something that kind of like might not be immediately apparent, but this is an old Magic card. Like your opponent gets to do it too. Like your deck needs to be more tuned to actually kind of take the most out of this, but that's kind of where you're going bigger. Kind of like, how are you breaking the symmetry, James? How are you getting more advantage out of this than your opponent?
So ideally, the way we're breaking the symmetry is that we cast Dream Halls and we win that turn. The symmetry doesn't matter as much if your opponent doesn't get a turn, right? Because it doesn't. They can cast instants, but they can't cast their sorceries. That being said, it is still a challenge, especially against permission. Because even if your opponent is tapped out and you get the Dream Halls down, well, they now all of a sudden you have to think about the permission again because their counterspell is now essentially a force of will, right? They can pitch a blue card to pay for it. And then it's sort of that problem's even more exacerbated because we're looking to play things like Time Twister and Wheel of Fortune. So if they didn't have the counterspell before, they might have one now, you know? So that is definitely a challenge, and you can have some problems against those decks, but you can also just, if they're not threatening you, you can just go big and try and casting these spells yourself, which can also be effective, right? You have a very high curve, which can be good in those matchups, actually. And then there's also just the inherent challenge of, if you include a bunch of cruel ultimatums and whatnot in your deck and you don't see your dream halls, that they can be a bit tough to try and leverage. So you need, but fortunately, already with dream halls, we're looking to play a bunch of card draw, right? So we can hopefully build a deck that is very, very good at finding dream halls. Tutors certainly are at a premium here. They're both excellent with the dream halls in play and really good at finding the dream halls, if that's what. And then I guess the other challenge is a lot of the very expensive cards we already play in Cube are either things like really expensive artifacts, stuff like Portal to Phyrexia, or really expensive Eldrazi like Emrakul, and they all don't work with Dream Halls. Dream Halls says discard a card that shares a color with it. No cards share a color with Emrakul. So that can be a challenge too, but it is, it would be less fun if there were no challenges. I did see a really funny interaction though recently where if you have Painter's Servant Grindstone in your cube, and you can cast Painter's Servant, and then you can pitch everything to Dream Halls, including
even your lands.
Yeah. It's kind of sick.
That's tight. Yeah. Worth clarifying as well, just for those who never played with it, you can't pitch an island to cast a blue spell because the lands don't have colors or that kind of stuff as well. And also because it specifically says colors, you can't pitch like a colorless artifact to cast your Eldrazi because they both don't have colors. It has to be a colored permanent. And yeah. In what James is saying. Yeah, Painter's Servant makes everything be that color, so they do work with Dream Halls. That's quite funny. I do quite like that.
Yeah, I think that's a cool combo anyway, so I'm kind of here for it. But not an easy deck to draft, not an easy deck to play, but so much fun when it comes together. It's one of those things where it makes you play Magic in a completely different way when there's a Dream Halls in play, right? Which is quite fun.
Yeah, completely agree. And we touched on like how the colors work, especially with Dream Halls. But like, what colors are the deck? I'm assuming blue because we need to be able to cast our Dream Halls and get it into play. But what's the shell that we're kind of working with this? Kind of like we mentioned cards like Cruel Ultimatum or Brilliant Ultimatum. Kind of like these are big blue X spells. Are we actually? Is the shell wanting to actually cast these spells, or is it more just like it's a spell-based deck and like we don't? It's kind of like Reanimator. We don't care what colors Atraxa is. It just needs to get in our deck because it's big. Is that how we are with the ultimatums, or is there a world where we actually want to maybe cast some of these?
The ultimatums in general, I'm not that worried about casting. It's nice if you have outs to do that in a really long game, but I'm primarily looking to Dream Halls them. But some of our other big expensive card draw is less color intensive, right? And we can cast. Think for dig through times, for the time spirals, all that stuff. We can certainly cast. And Dream Halls as an engine is just way better if you're closer to monocolor than not, right? Like, I'm not saying I think you're not really ever going to be actual monocolor. I mean, you will not that often, but ideally, you don't want to be like 50-50 blue and another color, right? You want to be like 80% blue, so that all your spells pitch to all your other spells, ideally. That being said, you will probably want a second color, mostly for some interaction to keep you alive long enough to cast Dream Halls and find your Dream Halls.
Yes.
Blue doesn't do a great job of that. So, like blue-red will be a really common one, but you could certainly be blue-white or blue-black, I think would work fine too.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think it's worth touching on, actually, that there is only one Dream Halls. There's only one fully loaded actual thing that does everything we want. There is a bit of redundancy. Like, I'm personally a big fan of, if you are running Dream Halls, also running a card like Mizzix's Mastery. This is 3 and a red for sorcery. Exile target card that's an instant or sorcery card from your graveyard. For each card exiled this way, copy it, and you may cast the copy without paying its mana cost. Exile Mizzix's Mastery. But it's got Overload for 5 red, red, red. So that lets you effectively cast every instant or sorcery from your graveyard. I quite like this as a backup Dream Halls. It's not as good as Dream Halls. It's kind of like how Through the Breach is a backup sneak attack. Having some redundancy means that you're not just completely screwed if you don't see the Dream Halls. So that's a card I always like mentioning whenever we talk about Dream Halls. There is also, like, it's not as good because all of our ultimatums are sorceries, but Torrential Gearhulk can be a solid card. It's the big Gearhulk that when it comes in, unless you cast an instant from your graveyard without paying its mana cost. There aren't as many broken instants as there are broken sorceries, but there are some cool cards. Like, I'm a big fan of Blood for the Blood God. That's a big 11 mana instant. At the moment, that's kind of it, but like in the future, if they print more big instant and sorceries, this deck will get better and kind of more fun as well, but just worth touching on, I think, there.
Yeah, the other nice thing about Gearhulk, right, is the Dream Halls kind of enables it, because it lets you discard the powerful spell to cast the Gearhulk, then the Gearhulk immediately flashes it back. So even if it's not something broken, right, even if it's like a cryptic command or something, just like discard my cryptic command to cast my Torrential Gearhulk. Gearhulk flashes back cryptic command. I can like counter your thing. I can even bounce the Gearhulk back to my hand so I can keep going. You know, it's pretty powerful.
Yeah, it is cool. It is just it's still a bit niche. Like it is a thing of just like there isn't. If you actually search for like instants and just do mana value down, all the really good ones are like the ones with Delve, that they're good because we can make them cost cheap. There isn't actually that density of just like actually good high powered like expensive instants we want to change to play yet. But it's given like but there will be in the future. It is just a matter of time. We get them every so often. What type of cube, though, James, do you like? You mentioned some very powerful cards. Like you mentioned Wheels, and you've mentioned, and the deck is built around cheating on mana and drawing lots of cards. What type of power level of cube? Because, like, for me, this is sounding quite high. But where do you think it can see play?
Yeah, I'd say like mid to high. I think it is like totally defensible to run in Vintage Cube. I think it works enough of the time. There's an argument that it's like tricky to dedicate the slots to have like the ultimatums and whatnot as well, but you can do it with just Wheels. But anything like, yeah, mid to high I think is good. You've got to be okay with putting all these broken cards in, right? Like Wheels are very powerful cards. Dream Hall itself is a very powerful card. It's also, you've probably just got to think about what you want the gameplay experience of your cube to be like. Like the Dream Halls I think we both said it's really fun to play, but it is like you can have a 10-minute turn playing Dream Halls. Some cube designers won't want that. It's not the most. It's not the like normal nuts and bolts magic that you might be trying to build into your cube, right? So it's I think even aside from power level, it's about like how combo-y versus fair do you want the cube to be. This is obviously very much on the combo end of that spectrum. But yeah, I think like mid to high power level cube, anything where you're like chill with putting a Time Twister into it is this is going to work very well.
I actively call my cube an unpowered cube, despite the fact the Time Twister's in it. It's not really power. Don't worry about it. Nice. All right, we have one more card to talk about today. And I think this is quite a powerful card. Like there was a long period of time where this card I would have put like just effectively if there was a power 9, this would have been just below it. Since then, Minsk and Brew, Broadside, Gut have all been printed, so I don't think it's... I don't know. Actually, maybe this is part of the conversation. But let's talk about Skullclamp. This is a single generic mana for an artifact equipment. It has equipped creature gets +1/-1. Whenever equipped creature dies, draw 2 cards, and it has equip for a single... and has equip for 1 mana. But James, -1 is a downside. Why would you want to kill your own creature?
Yeah, so funny story about this card. It's apparently in the initial design, it was just +1/+0. But then Wizards decided that was a bit too powerful, so they made it +1/-1.
I mean, yes, obviously.
Yeah. That's worse, right?
Yeah.
But we're not really about just putting this on creatures and hoping they die in combat. The plan with Skullclamp is we want to have a bunch of 1 toughness creatures. And then we're going to pay 1 mana, equip Skullclamp to them. They die, we cash them in for 2 cards. That's really powerful. That's such a strong card draw engine. So obviously to make this worthwhile, right, we need to be making these 1 toughness creatures fairly cheaply. But they don't want to be really valuable creatures. You know, if you play turn 1 Ragavan and then turn 2 you cast Skullclamp and equip it, you've arguably not made the best out of that. But think like tokens, repeatable token generation is ideal, or just like value creatures. You know, imagine you've got our favorite card for the day, say to Wayfinder lying around, chuck a Skullclamp on it, draw 2 cards for nominal value. We love to see it. And it's the fact that it can keep providing that ongoing card velocity throughout the game, right? It's a really powerful card. It's not... You've got to make very specific choices in the draft to maximize it. You can't just blindly put this in any deck and have it be good. But in the right deck, Skullclamp can be one of the most powerful cards in even the highest power level cubes.
And this might sound really simple, James, but like, what do we need to enable it? Is it just a deck full of 1/1s, or is there anything we can do to really kind of get more use out of it than just running like a Savannah Lion?
Yeah, ideally the things you're killing with the Skullclamp are hopefully things you've not sort of spent a full card on. So it might be that you've spent a card that got you multiple tokens, so you're clamping them each way individually for 2 cards, or it might be that it was a value creature that did something for you on the way in. Say you cast a Necrotal, you killed their creature, and then you equipped a Skullclamp to it. There's a couple of really nice homes for this, though. So I think probably the most natural one at the moment is the Artifact deck, because we have so many effects now of these creatures that make 1/1s when you cast spells. So think Third Path Iconoclast, Ravenous Robots, Pinnacle Emissary, the 3-mana Saheeli. These all go absolutely nuts with a Skullclamp. Because you're going to clamp for tokens, that's going to draw you into more spells, which you can cast, create more tokens, keep going. So if you have something like a Solarian Academy or an Urza, you're probably getting for your whole deck right there. It's honestly, that's one of those ends where there are times where I've ended up wanting to play a Thassa's Oracle in my Artifact deck because my Skullclamp could get through my deck so quickly that I was going to, and my Urza was generating mana, that I was going to just get through my whole deck in a turn and win with Thassa's Oracle. So that can be really strong. There's also, but you can also just be leaning more into like, we have value creatures, we're making tokens even if they're not repeatable. You know, like, you don't need tons of things that go ham with Skullclamp for Skullclamp to still be really good. Like, and just have a Lingering Souls in your deck, right? That's 8 cards. You don't really need to draw more cards than that most of the time. Not to say I don't want to, but 8 cards is normally enough. So you can just be like a good creature deck, and you have a few things that work really nicely with it. Like, say you've got an Adeline, or it's just going to keep generating 1/1s, or you've just got some nice little value creatures which are going to get you value on the way through. You can also think about it. It's okay with mana dorks. It's not great. It wouldn't be my primary thing. It can be nice, if I have my elf on turn 1, I use it for banner a bunch, and then later in the game I clamp it away for 2 cards. That's quite good. But generally the plan of, if I drew a Lanoir elf, I cast a Lanoir elf, I equip Skullclamp to it, I spend 2 mana to draw 2 cards. That's fine, but it's a Night Whisper, right? It's not like busted in the way that it is if you're going off with like a Iconoclast or something, right? But just having a few tokens lying around, like something like Staff of the Storyteller, great with Skullclamp. Bitter Blossom is kind of nuts, obviously. Yeah, there's just a lot of token generation by default in most cubes. So not that, Clamp is going to be good in every deck, but if you take it early, you will probably see cards that enable you to make it work.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I really like it with, as you mentioned, just like the kind of free repeatable ones. So like, I'm a big fan of it with like Rebel Masters, creatures that attack and make tokens. Fantastic. It just finds your burn or finds your next couple of spells really good. And I guess like other kind of recursive like threats, like things like a Bloodghast or Gutter Bones, that kind of stuff, really good. Just get crunch in for some damage, sack them to draw some cards, and just go again. I think it's really good. And one thing that's nice about Skullclamp is that it's a busted card for like an Aristocrat deck as well, which kind of doesn't really have too many broken cards. Like one thing with Skullclamp is that people will just take it early because I guess there's a world where kind of like, because like creature-based decks have got better, Skullclamp has got better as well because people are playing more creatures, they're committing to the board more, there's more things for Skullclamp to just gobble up, if that kind of makes sense. But yeah, like that -1 can cause your thing to die to trigger your Blood Artist, so that is something that is cool with it as well. Are there any other archetypes that we haven't mentioned?
I think those are the big ones, but I mean, it is just a pretty flexible card. Like you can have like a blue-red tokens deck with like a Pyromancer and stuff like that, and Skullclamp can be great there. You can have black decks where it's great. You can have white decks where it's great. It's one of those cards where it's more about the individual card choices you make during the draft than it is about the colors, I find. It's a card that is way more powerful if you take it early in the draft than if you see it in pack 3 in general, because you kind of do need to make those right choices to make Skullclamp busted.
Yeah, and that's kind of the interesting thing of kind of like, when I first saw the list you put together, James, kind of like, there's a bit of kind of like a mental pivot between you see Dream Halls and then you see Skullclamp. Because like that part of me is like, oh, Skullclamp is just the kind of this like, I don't want to say generically good card, but kind of like it can go into so many decks. But I think what's important with it and why we're talking about it today is that if it is that thing of, if you lean into it, if you treat it like a build around, you get so much more out of it. Kind of like James was talking about how he had a Skullclamp deck and one with a Thassa's Oracle. That is not where my mind was going when he mentioned a Skullclamp. I was thinking more the fair Lingering Souls Bitter Blossom. But it shows that if you lean into it and if you support it and if you treat it like a build around, you can get more out of it than just this kind of like cool, like good card is good card. But good card can be great card if you lean into it and commit to the bit. Yeah,
for sure. I think, honestly, I treat this as a build around when I am drafting with it. I wouldn't really treat it as a build around from like a cube construction point of view, because I don't think you need to make specific choices when you're building your cube to support Skullclamp in most places. Like, it's just there's going to be enough there naturally, but you definitely do need to make those choices during the draft when if you take Skullclamp early, because you do need a good density of 1 toughness creatures to make it excellent, and ideally repeatable ones that aren't costing you much in terms of value to create them. But it's worth noting as well, the other mode of this which I guess is the mode that Wizards has in mind, does still come up sometimes when it's in your deck. Like, you do the thing of, I have a 4/4, you have a 4/4, well, I'm going to equip my Skullclamp to my 4/4 and attack you, and if we trade, I'm going to draw 2 cards. And, that's fine. But really what you're looking to do here is degenerate things with repeatable token making.
Yeah, and when it comes together, it's very, very broken. Nice. I think we should touch on, I think it's kind of been obvious from how we've talked about this card, but we should just clarify, what power level, James, are we talking about with Skullclamp?
Oh, the highest.
Yes.
Yeah. Listen, theoretically, I think this is an uncommon. I think you could put it in a peasant cube. You definitely shouldn't.
No, you should not.
This is a super powerful card. It's going to be a massive power outlier if you put it in anything but the most powerful cubes. It doesn't have to be an actual powered cube. It could be unpowered, but outside of that max power level. But yeah, this is a pretty degenerate card. It's very, very strong.
Yes, and we love it. Skullclamp, an utter banger. All right, I think that's going to do it for today. James, thank you for that. Really good chat on 3 really cool build-arounds that I feel I can definitely get more out of after today.
Yeah, always a pleasure.
Just leaves me to thank you all very much for listening. Do make sure you like, share, give the podcast a 5-star review, a thumbs up, tell a friend, greatly helps us out. You have been listening to Powerful Nothing. Until next week, it's goodbye from me, and it's goodbye from James, and we'll see you all soon. Goodbye.